even though it never really enjoyed success outside of Japan. White Knight Chronicles Origins marked the first portable entry in the series that lends much of its inspiration from Capcom's Monster Hunter. You start out by creating a character and swiftly joining a band of mercenaries that take on a series of jobs, from taking down monsters to collecting specific items or charting out all of the areas available on any of the multiple maps. From lush fields to the deserted towns and mysterious caves, there's a lot of variety when it comes to exploring the world, with each of the quests being able to be taken on from a hub area that serves as your base of operation. Here you can buy new armor, craft new weapons, and interact with a range of different NPCs that help flesh out the story. And on the gameplay front, much like Monster Hunter, there's plenty of challenge, and this is where the real-time combat takes center stage. You get to assign up to 5 different abilities to 3 separate sections of the command bar that can be navigated by using the D-pad, and there's plenty of depth to achieve the ideal balance. Standard attacks, healing, and large specials, for example, can be prioritized on the first palette, while support and restoring spells are found on the second, and spells that cause damage may be used on the last. This setup allows the player to seamlessly switch between different strategies on the fly, and by far makes the combat one of the most engaging aspects of the experience. Even though Origins never reaches the same heights of its clear inspiration, and its simplicity will likely turn away some of the more hardcore RPG fans out there, it has a truly enjoyable pick-up-and-play feel to it that makes it perfect for someone looking to dip their toes into the world of hunting on the go. Blazing Souls Exceller is a somewhat modified version of the PlayStation 2 game that never found its way outside of Japan. It's a turn-based SRPG that throws you into the shoes of Zelos, and after a huge 7-year war that rocked the kingdom, peace has nearly returned, with only small pockets of monsters and resistance left throughout the land. However, this is short-lived, and it soon becomes apparent that a new threat in the form of superhumans sent from the gods to become the rulers of the planet is what will really test the inhabitants of the world. To be fair, the story is perhaps the game's weakest aspect, but when it comes to gameplay, for fans of SRPGs, the depth here is incredibly satisfying. The ability to mix and match skills, create powerful combos, and experiment with different strategies provides a rewarding experience that'll keep you glued to your PSP for hours on end. The game also encourages exploring, with hidden dungeons, rare items, and secret characters waiting to be discovered by those who are thorough, and for those that do, many of the game's more devastating skills await you, allowing you to take on the range of different enemies you'll encounter with ease. One last aspect of the battles is the capture move that you can learn. This ability allows you to capture pretty much any monster that you come across in battles, which can then be summoned to fight alongside your party. Of course, this adds even more things to consider when jumping into each fight, and it's here where many players will likely have issues with the game. There is just a lot of stuff going on, and if you're not willing to take the time to get to grips with each of them, it's easy to find yourself getting lost. When it comes down to it, Blazing Souls Exceller won't be for everyone, but for those that it clicks with, it'll likely become one of your favorite SRPGs on the system. Throne of Agony is a dungeon crawler that starts out like any other game of its kind and allows you to choose a character from one of several different classes, each with their own skill sets, from the physically powerful to the athletic as well as the magic user, which allows you to approach the game in a way that suits your style of play best. While there's only a small amount of options, as you progress throughout the game you do get to change your class at least 2 different times, which allows your character to learn new skills in addition to the 15 you unlock from your base class. On top of this, as you level up, you'll be earning attribute points which can be spent on one of many different options, such as your strength, stamina, and agility, that all result in a noticeable difference out on the field. This is where combat comes into play, and is by far Throne of Agony's most engaging aspect. The controls are quite simple, with many of your abilities being mapped to the face buttons, but by holding down the right shoulder button, you can access even more attacks, mainly your special skills, and because of this setup, the combat has got a fluid and ferocious style to it that just never lets up. Naturally, there's an array of enemies and bosses with varying levels of difficulty in every part of the world, and you can explore each of the game's main parts at your own pace and complete the dungeons in any order. This freedom helps the game excel and doesn't just funnel you into a predetermined path. If you're looking for a competent dungeon crawler that's easy to get into on the PSP, then Throne of Agony is far from the worst choice out there. Hexy's Force is no doubt one of the most overlooked RPGs on the PSP, and introduces players to the world of Burge that's divided into both a light and dark side that gives you two separate campaigns to make your way through. You've got Cecilia and Levant that offer up unique perspectives of the world, and of course a nice amount of replay value, as both are completely different from one another. Despite the somewhat predictable aim of both stories that see a battle between creation and destruction in a world torn apart, the game manages to pack some truly interesting twists and great writing that help flesh out the events, as well as several of the characters you'll be meeting along the way. When it comes to gameplay, Hexy's Force offers a good old turn-based setup, but what makes it a bit different is that there's no traditional leveling in the game, and instead your progression is tied to your weapons that can be upgraded through the use of force points that are rewarded at the end of each battle. There's no shops in the game either, so everything from items to armor and accessories must all be gained from fallen enemies or crafted through the use of your force points, which at first may seem like a bit of a stupid idea, but as the game unfolds, you'll realize that you won't need much anyway, and can instead focus on building a specific set of weapons and equipment right up to the game's end. Now, a single campaign can be completed in about 20 to 25 hours, and as I mentioned earlier, there's plenty of motivation to play through the second campaign, because the two protagonists live in different nations and have distinct goals to complete. So if you never got around to it when it first released, there's never been a better time than now to give it a go for yourself. Blade Dancer was one of the first RPGs to hit the PSP and focuses on Lance, a young man who finds himself landing on the shores of a distant land and vowing to pledge his services to the very first person who requires his aid. On his journey, you'll come into contact with friends and foes alike as your mysterious powers slowly bloom and reveal your place in an ancient prophecy. For anyone familiar with RPGs, the story will feel instantly familiar and deploys several of the tropes you'll be accustomed to, but it still provides an engaging story that gets the job done. Gameplay is also pretty standard, but introduces enough of its own ideas that Blade Dancer can stand on its own. As you explore the vast kingdom, you'll notice that each enemy is represented on screen by a floating skull, and you're free to dodge any encounter as you wish that negates the usual endless amount of fights you'll find in similar adventures. Once you do get into battle though, this is where Blade Dancer shines, and it's a mix of turn-based and real-time elements that all revolve around something known as lunar points, with a bar in the top left that starts out empty at the beginning of each fight. As you land melee hits on the enemy, it slowly fills up and allows you to perform one of several different types of magic or attacks that cost a certain amount of these points to perform. What makes it interesting is that the enemies also draw from this pool of points, and by putting an end to their attacks, you can protect yourself from them and maintain a high lunar meter, which allows your own party to use the points for themselves. It's a really great combat system, and although Blade Dancer isn't exactly the most impressive RPG you'll find on the PSP, it's still a great little adventure that you can now pick up on the PS4 or 5 should you wish to give it a go. Generation of Chaos is an SRPG that follows the story of Gina and her crusade along with her faction against the Dark Empire bent on the resurrection of a Dark Dragon. The entire game is split up into a series of chapters that are all centered around massive board-like game maps that the player gets to move their units around, take part in battle, and carry out various amounts of micromanagement to strengthen and expand their army. Instead of sending in 1 to 5 units in a preset battle based on a rock-paper-scissors strategy, Generation of Chaos sees you with up to 30 units against the enemy that rush into battle in a real-time sequence, and allows your own skill to dictate the outcome of each battle. Much like its name implies, it can be utter and total chaos of points and looks incredible as it all plays out on the small screen. Naturally, there's a lot of strategy that will dictate the outcome of each clash, and this is where formations come into focus. There's a surprisingly good amount to choose from, but the most effective that I found myself using throughout my playtime was either kamikaze or aggressive, which play out exactly as you would expect. It's not all just about going all out though, as some fights will see you on the defensive, where taking on enemies from a distance and preserving the life of your leader are paramount. This variety is what really helps Generation of Chaos succeed, and with the amount of techniques you can perform, many of which are drip-fed to you throughout the campaign, you're always in a position to gain the upper hand, but for each one you use, a certain amount of SP will be consumed, so remembering to manage that value effectively is the key to surviving. Overall, it might be a bit overwhelming at first, but after some time, Generation of Chaos will no doubt become one of your favorite RPGs on the PSP. The Legend of Heroes series began way back in the late 80s and has always been one of my go-tos when people ask me about a continuing RPG franchise to get into. Tier of Vermilion is the 4th entry and was originally released on the NEC PC and would later be fully remade for the PSP, which follows the adventure of Arvin, a young man separated from his sister many years ago in the cruelest of circumstances. You set out to search for her and explore the world, which naturally sees you getting drawn into a much bigger plot that'll see you making friends as well as a few enemies on the way. This is by far the game's most endearing aspect, as all its characters are extremely well written and really add to the overall feel of the world that the game presents. But having a great presentation and story is only half of the battle, as the gameplay needs to be just as enjoyable to keep you marching forward, and thankfully Tier of Vermilion does exactly that. This can solely be attributed to the game's battle system, which sees your party consisting of up to 4 different characters at any one time. Each of them have a movement and attack range which really piles on the strategy and forces the player to take advantage of each character's specific traits. From normal attacks to magic, special skills and the use of items, there's plenty of ways to tackle each encounter, and upon each enemy's defeat you'll receive experience points which contribute to new skills as well as your level that affects your effectiveness as a team. That being said, the game is quite easy, and apart from the last boss you'll find yourself getting very few game overs, especially if you're an experienced RPG fan. Although the translation is a bit wonky and the systems that comprise the game are quite simple, it's still one hell of an adventure that's definitely worth undertaking. Mystic Chronicles is an old-school RPG in every sense of the word, and if you're like me and are fond of the 16-bit era, then this game will be right up your street. The story follows Lux, a young man who wishes to become a part of a guild to protect his village. However, during his first set of missions, his childhood friend disappears, and it isn't long until he becomes wrapped up in a struggle against a creeping darkness that puts the fate of the entire world in the balance. In all honesty, the story does the game no favors, as it's painfully generic, but it does at least facilitate what Mystic Chronicles gets right, and that's the gameplay. The battles are very reminiscent of Dragon Quest and take place from a first-person perspective, with your character's statistics and portraits laid out across the bottom of the screen. You've got your standard actions, including attack, defend, or using magic and items, with each party member having their own abilities to call upon as well. From damage sponges to healers and absolute brutes, they've all got their own specific uses. But what helps mix it up is the ability to pull off team moves that provide a means to lay out some heavy amounts of damage. Another aspect of the battles revolve around something known as guardian beasts that can be set up for each character to assist you in each fight. Unfortunately, there's no direct control given to the player, but they can be set up to follow specific strategies that can flip the tables during some of the more challenging moments. With its solid battle system, lovable characters and retro aesthetic, Mystic Chronicles is definitely worth checking out. Just don't expect the same depth that you'll find in other RPGs on the PSP. Student Alliance is essentially a port of a PS2 game, and although it's clearly an inferior version thanks to some rather long load times and blurry visuals, it's still a compelling RPG that sees you playing as Vane, a young boy who lives in a small village and enrolls in a school of alchemy. It's not long until the story opens up into a far grander adventure for Vane and his companions to undertake, and while it won't be winning any awards for originality, it's still pretty solid. It's all laid out in chapters that each follow a simple routine that sees you taking part in lessons, exploring the world in your own free time, and events that throw you into the heat of battle. As you venture out into the world, there's a few different things you'll encounter apart from enemies, and this is mainly materials which can be used to create new items and weapons that can help you hold your own when it comes to facing down one of the many different types of threats that await you. Now, the battle system itself isn't anything groundbreaking and sees all of your characters being represented by cards at the top of the screen which dictate the turn order of each fight. Where the game truly comes into its own though is crafting, and through something known as the growth book, as traditional leveling up isn't present, and instead you must constantly improve the equipment that you use, such as weapons and armor that can be customized with plenty of different effects. Although some of the technical aspects let it down, Student Alliance is still a pretty enjoyable RPG that any fan of the genre can easily jump into and enjoy. Brave Story New Traveler is basically a side story to the popular manga of the same name, and sees many of its characters making an appearance that fans of the series will know and love. The adventure revolves around a boy known as Tatsuya, who finds himself drawn into a mysterious dimension where he aims to seek out the tower of a goddess who's said to be able to grant wishes. With the life of one of his friends hanging in the balance, he prepares to make the journey, and this is where the game kicks off. It sees you exploring this land that, as you would expect, is occupied by several monsters that will stop at nothing to halt your plans. The gameplay relies on the tried and tested turn-based formula and sees each battle giving you up to 3 different characters to manage at any one time. Of course, each of them have their own specific attacks and qualities that make utilizing all of them effectively your main means of surviving throughout the adventure. As each character fights battles, they form bonds between each other, which will allow them to cast unity attacks. These are highly powerful skills that are all beholden to the amount of BP or brave points you possess, which slowly regenerate over the course of each encounter, with each fight soon becoming a juggling act between maintaining your points and dealing out enough damage. Now, one of the first things you'll notice about the game are its visuals, which are easily some of the best the PSP has to offer. From each character to every town and dungeon you'll run into, there's a serious amount of detail they possess, and that's not even mentioning the battles, which provide plenty of effects as you carry out attacks that bring life to even the most simple of encounters. For those of you that love turn-based RPGs, Brave Story New Traveler is without a doubt one of the best adventures you'll find on the PSP. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake, and Patty J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.